Welcome everybody to the Konflux Community Architecture Call. Today is Tuesday, February 11th. We have two topics from Adam today, but just a reminder, by participating in this call, you are agreeing to follow the published code of conduct for the community as well. With that, Adam, do you want to introduce your topics?
Yeah. Hey, folks. So I've got two topics. Both are kind of related to the theme of community outreach and kind of growing our community around Konflux. So the first is around documentation and thinking about ways that we can improve documentation. This is something that, since I've become more back involved with the Konflux project, has emerged as an immediate need to improve what the documentation is. And I had a very good conversation with one of the folks at CNCF to go through what, in their experience, makes for good documentation and a good an experience for developers and users, contributors alike. So I want to start the conversation around what we need, and I'll share the and the link is there too in the meeting agenda. The CNCF doc primer for sandbox projects. So these are projects that are new to the CNCF, projects that are brought in, and this primer, as well as some of the other documentation, is some of the links in here is what the CNCF uses when a project asks for help with their docs. They use kind of this and other materials as evaluation criteria for recommendations. So high level, one of the things that they recommend in terms of how you frame docs is kind of separate out the things that are conceptual from the things that are more task driven and the things that are reference. That's kind of like recommendation number one. Number two, and this is actually something that came out of the Linux Foundation coursework that I recently completed, is that having good reference documentation is actually kind of helps you set up a good foundation for success and build it, and it helps you build upon these other types of documentation that are called out. And the last thing is more about in terms of developing documentation, thinking about who the audience is, and there can be multiple different kinds of audience for a particular piece of documentation, and so it's helpful to almost have like an architecture around the docs themselves. We are defining kind of these user roles, these are personas, in thinking about what is the doc, what are the docs that you need, what are the docs that maybe prioritizing which documentation needs to be written, and so forth. So I want to kind of turn it back to the community here to ask, in your mind, in your experience, what do you think we need? What are the things that with our documentation we are struggling with in Konflux, so that we can, I'm thinking of potentially putting this into a written, almost like probably like an ADR type of thing. So I'd love to hear you do
that. Based on my experience talking with people about the talks, I think that one thing that many users miss are kind of clear steps for the happy path. We have a lot of information on configuring builds, but it's not necessarily clear when those different steps are needed, how to start from nothing know which topics you need to go through in order to end up in your final path. So like I think that we have, I mean, we have a lot of information there about the details, but we don't have much information about the overall flow. So that's certainly one aspect. Another area of the documentation that I've heard lots of people asking about is API documentation. We had that previously, or we have that to some extent in the architecture page that we push. But I don't know how updated that is. So that there's some information there, but even like at a basic level, people might want to know how can we interact with the system that isn't driven by the UI, and that's not. I mean, the API is some aspect of it, but also like if you have Tecton results configured, then knowing how to interact with that operator so that users know how to go about finding the information they need, since so much of the processing is driven by work done in Tecton pipelines. And I think that you mentioned different personas. I don't know how robust our persona development is and how robust we are at ensuring that the appropriate workloads are present, or the appropriate workflows are present for those different personas. You might have somebody that's a developer, you might have somebody that's a user, somebody that's more of a platform engineer, and they're going to be interested in very different types of workflows. And they're going to have probably different knowledge about troubleshooting and the ability to debug through issues that happen.
It's like Ralph has his hand up.
Yeah, I do. I've heard from users examples are one of the things that are mainly missing in our documentation. Simple examples. I feel like we've got some conceptual docs and some how-to guides that are like, what's the right word? They're like conflated. Like in the middle of some how-to guide, there'll like be a pause to explain some things. But if those were somehow more cleanly separated into a concepts and a guides section, I feel like that would help. On the API reference documentation, I agree with that too, what Andrew's saying. The API reference is auto-generated from the Go structs, so in a certain way, it should always be up to date. But it's missing some like meaningful API things that can happen with annotations that don't get surfaced as a part of that, like how you retrigger a build. You find that in the how to trigger a rebuild guide, but you don't find it in the API reference where it probably should be. So some way to surface that stuff, I think, would be helpful. We've also got this clunky division between how-to guides and advanced how-to guides. And like the line for when you're advanced and not, like that comes from like an old era of the project when that meant something. It doesn't mean anything anymore. So we should abolish that difference and just streamline that stuff.
Yeah, I think that was probably from that early Stone Soup App Studio day of we had that simple build pipeline, and that's gone.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this would be helpful, but I find that sometimes users have a hard time understanding the different phases of Konflux. It's very clear in my mind where it's build, integration, release. but I think those things sometimes are not super clear to users. So I think maybe if we could lean on that a little bit more on the docs, instead of simple advanced, maybe talk about the different phases that we have, and just try to make that language a little bit more more consistent and more prominent, not just in the docs but when we talk to users as well.
Yeah, there's trying to get Ernesto's link from the chat here.
I'll just jump in without raising my hand. Another thing I'd like to see is, oh my gosh, I totally forgot it. I should have raised my hand and then I'd have time to remember what I wanted to say. Never mind. I think I'll raise my hand again. I remembered what it was. For contributing a new task end to end with both the build definitions entry and contract policy, conformal policy entries, and how that gets used and referenced and rolled out like a guide to contribute to like that unit of functionality to a Konflux instance. Yeah, and maybe the key there is the E2E. I think we have bits of contributor guide for all that stuff, but not like it's like an end-to-end journey for adding some new capability and then to require it. Louis, sorry, what are you asking?
The first thing you said about the conformal policy, I don't think I fully understand what you meant by that.
So a thing we do all the time is let's add a new scanner that scans for the signatures on a certain kind of package. And then that can be rolled out, to existing Konflux users. But then we also need to add a policy that knows how to check that scan was run, and then we need to roll that out. And an end-to-end guide that explains to somebody if they want to add a new capability, how to both implement functionality, roll it out to users, and then to require it in conformal policy. That would be, I think, useful.
And I guess that would be more for a conformer contributor, not so much a user, correct?
I think that's right. Yeah, it's a different persona, right?
Yeah, it's like combination of like a project contributor, but also I could see effectively a platform engineering team rolling out and managing Konflux for their organization.
Yeah, and it's like a day two part of that operation. You've already rolled it out. You already have people using it. It's great. And now you want to add some new requirement for your organization, implement a new scanner, require that scanner by some time frame. I don't know if it's helpful or not for the discussion that you wanted to have, Adam, but I know Andrew and I'm looking at calendars. We were thinking about trying to have a a day to focus on docs on, I think it was March 14th. We found a common slot on our calendars, and we were planning on having just a private docs party, but we could open that up and let anybody participate or I don't know, just advertise that we're going to be focusing then if everyone else wants
Day
to
of docs.
Yeah, we'll all jump on it.
I like it.
For anybody within Red Hat, I think that it's on our shared calendar. If there's anybody from outside Red Hat that would like to be invited to the event that's created, we can certainly get you added.
Yeah, definitely. It's maybe not a problem or like a to-do item, but a question about, in general, where do we want to try to draw the line between our docs and then the upstream docs of projects that we depend on? For instance, Tecton, right? Like lots of places we have docs that are like a shim over the pipeline as code docs, where we explain only the thing you most frequently need to know, and then we say for anything else, go read the pipelines as code docs. I think I like the couple examples where that works, but there's plenty of other examples where we could be more consistent in where we draw that line.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about that too, even with some of our other sub-project components like Conforma, Hermeto, MintMaker, another kind of good example, where even MintMaker is a pseudo fork of Renovate. Renovate has its own documentation set. I think one of the challenges is that, frankly, as we're like in my mind, as we're exploring how to improve our docs, we will find that we will also have the urge and desire to improve the upstream docs of other projects, and our confidence in the ability to influence that will likely vary. Tecton, like as a lot of the folks here are also involved with the Tecton project, are known, have strong ability to influence that community. That might not be such a hard thing to do. Renovate, maybe not. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, maybe if it's more like we have like, maybe the line is like if we've got a how-to, or we feel like we need to write a how-to, that that can be in the sort of Konflux docs, but for API reference documentation, that might be something where we try to point to the upstream if it exists first, and supplement if we see that it's not there.
Just that last comment made me think, Adam, like imagine the user experience of coming to our API docs and you don't see pipeline run there.
Yeah.
Right. Like what?
Like we might need to have that sort of like intro level thing, but at the same time, like the full spec is the thing you really want out of an API reference. Maybe we even go down the path of generating that doc out of the Tecton code. We roughly know which Tecton version we are based on.
And just, I see your hand, Andrew. Real quick, we could use the same code that we already use to generate documentation out of Go structs. That should be a straightforward thing to try to add.
To just comment about Jeff's question in chat. I think that the architecture that we have for Konflux makes the external dependencies potentially very hard to enumerate, because sometimes you have a dependency on task level. So I know that Ralph had been exploring some options in the past for pulling in all the documentation that we have in our build definitions repo to document tasks in one place. That's certainly one way that we can try to improve this visibility if we have those dependencies properly defined when we define the tasks as well. That would be likely especially relevant for something like Hermeto, just because that is a dependency that's introduced with a specific task. So it's a very different model of dependency. Sometimes we have dependencies for Konflux itself, what our services depend on, something as core as Tekton or Pipelines as code. We don't want to just reproduce all those documentations. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to discuss about this, or Adam, do you want to move on to your next topic?
Yeah, I'm fine moving on. This is definitely an awesome, good place to start. Item number 2. Let's see. Hopefully that is visible. So I'll paste the link in chat here as well. So this is an idea that originally was coming out of the folks who are working with the build definitions, as well as myself and some of the folks at Red Hat who work on Shipwright. Were brainstorming ways to effectively build a self-sustaining community around Konflux. And there's another group within Red Hat that is also like interested in this as well. And so I wanted to bring this here as maybe establishing a separate working group within the Konflux community that is focused on outreach. And so it's kind of related to the documentation item that I had earlier, but it's really about encouraging and adopting best practices from open source, not just within Konflux itself, but the subprojects and dependencies that we have, establishing communication strategy around Konflux so that we can share the knowledge of what's in Konflux and how you can use Konflux. Promoting and along those lines is also looking through means of engagement, either through public speaking opportunities, conferences, blog posts, other types of media, and finally, if there are opportunities for collaboration, encouraging those, potentially creating sub-standing working groups. I see Andrew says we should call it a SIG. Yeah, because this probably feels more like a standing group than just a one-off thing. And I know in Kubernetes community, working groups are meant to be temporary, whereas SIGs are kind of permanent and they have ownership of things.
That's interesting. I didn't never thought of that difference. I was thinking it was just a bike shedding thing. If everyone wanted to call them working groups instead of
Yeah.
SIG, you know, in
Yeah,
one
so they have very specific definition of SIG versus working group.
Yeah. Do you think of this as a working group as a short-term thing, or do you think of it as a long-term thing?
I would see this as a long-term thing.
I think so too. Its ownership boundary isn't necessarily clear. Like what it would own is not clear, but I think that doesn't matter. It's that we want a place that anybody over time who wants to get involved in that kind of work could come and join and connect with people interested in the same kind of thing. Yeah, I think this is super cool. Thanks, Adam. I know I'm thinking about all this stuff, and I'd love to have a place to go to talk with other people who are interested in the same.
Yeah. There's definitely a bunch of folks that reached out to me who were interested in this, and I think the logical next step would be then to create that sort of first kickoff meeting where we kind of define this, establish the scope, and then start brainstorming ideas. So would folks maybe next week consider adding to the community calendar that the community outreach SIG sort of kickoff? And
That sounds great, Adam. Sorry, I was speaking over you. My bad.
I may just reach out to you, Ralph, offline about ensuring we configure the calendar invite and meet so that it's open to anyone, not just within Red Hat.
That sounds good. We'll make sure to do that, and I'd love to get a merge request up in that community repo just to declare, when a copy paste of exactly what you have in front of us.
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm excited.
I'll go back to sharing the agenda.
There's no other topics on the agenda today. Does anybody have a topic that they would like to bring up?
Well, it's related to the last point. Just an announcement that the call for papers for Open Source Summit North America is due next Monday on the 17th. So take a look at the different tracks. There's a bunch of us thinking about submitting ideas on different aspects of Konflux as a larger system and Konflux itself.
I think CDCon is a part of Open Source Summit North America, so that might be one venue for submissions. When I was last involved in the CDF, they were very much open to submissions from outside the foundation. And DevConf Renault also has a CFP due, I think it's March 2nd. And I think there's some folks on this call who might be planning on attending.
All right. Any other topics? Thanks for adding those last two to the agenda, just to remind folks if they're looking at the agenda afterwards.
I saw, just chatting as we wind down, I saw at FOSDEM there was a huge track on SBOM production. Konflux would have been a perfect thing to talk about there, or just Kashido and Hermeto as ways of building S-bombs. Something like 15 talks or something on S-bombs. Lots of peers, right, that we could have been a part of, talking about how their technology works and how ours works.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.